Hello YouTube. Bane666 here. As most of you probably know, I started this series of videos to expose the lie that Elliot Rodger was connected to the men's rights movement. But I am now expanding it to cover any falsehoods, misconceptions, misinformation, or outright lies spread about the MRM. So let's get stuck into it.
Hello there. Today I thought I'd take you through the 10 worst lies told by the men's rights movement.
Meet Kevin Logan. He doesn't know what a men's rights activist is, but he's going to tell us the 10 worst lies spread by the men's rights movement. As his video is long, and some of his list of 10 will need a more detailed debunking than others, I won't be doing them all in one video. So this might take 2, 3, or even 4 episodes to get through, just depending on how much bullshit I have to shovel, and how much of him I can handle in one go. Anyway, there are a number of things you should look out for. Like his constant use of hate-fueled ad homs in lieu of actual arguments. And the fact that apart from Paul Elam, everyone he presents as an MRA, actually isn't an MRA. Which isn't really that much of a surprise, especially considering he got a lot of his information from Man Cheese, aka Sale Polani. Anyway, let's have a look at number 1 on his list.
Now this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, as quite frankly there would be far too much to fit into one video, and they're in no particular order of severity or frequency of use.
But, as the title suggests, they are the 10 worst, in his opinion.
Also, all the relevant stats will be linked in the description box below. Now on with the list. Uno! Feminists hate men. This particular canard is ridiculous and hypocritical because feminism has nothing to do with hating men.
Really? Try telling that to the feminists on Tumblr. Okay, so maybe Tumblr is low-hanging fruit. Although it is very typical of what will be the next wave of feminism. But let's look at something more mainstream, like, I'm Trying Not to Hate Men, by Laura Bogart, published on Salon earlier this year. Or what about a particularly vile creature who goes by the name of Glosswitch, and writes for the New Statesman? Earlier this year, in a video I featured her article titled, Only Feminism Can Stop My Sons Growing Up to Hate Women. In this article she paints males as some kind of violent subhumans, who seem genetically predetermined to hate women, and of course women never ever do any wrong. And obviously only the one true faith of feminist indoctrination, from an early age has a chance to change this. From the article. I am tired of this cycle, one which leads not just to misery for women but to thwarted expectations for men. As the mother of boys I know I'm expected to suppress my resentment and get on board with the next pro-masculinity project, hoping that it will make my children into strong, confident men, or at least ones who don't resent me for being too much of a harpy. I'm expected to wring my hands about their self-esteem and to panic about girls stealing all the A's in university places. I'm meant to worry about them disliking themselves, not about whether they will also learn to dislike women. I'm supposed to assume, glibly, that as long as they are content and fulfilled, they will not become misogynists, however filled with hate the air that they breathe. I simply don't believe this. I watch the pro-boys movement, tracking feminist progress and launching one bad faith counter-move after another, and I know it will not spare my sons the misery of hating. Only feminism can do that. Needless to say, I feel sorry for her sons who will undoubtedly one day need therapy. Read any of this bigot's articles, and you will see the same hate-filled patterns. Men are violent hate-filled monsters, determined to use violence, which she seems to think is intrinsic to masculinity, and is its one and only attribute, against all women everywhere, at all times. Of course women are gentle, pure, and more than a little divine in comparison to beastly males. Think I'm exaggerating? Then let's look at another of her articles. It's extreme masculinity, not love or despair, that drives a father to kill his children. And from the article. Masculinity is not some fragile butterfly on a wheel. It depends on reducing other people to objects. The solution is not to recreate an imaginary golden age in which said objects were, so we tell ourselves, more pliable and less likely to disrupt the narrative. A world in which not only jobs were stable and not going anywhere, but neither were women and children. That world dehumanized over half the human race, and we should temper our sympathy for those men who would openly mourn its passing. As the feminist Kathy Merriam argues, the problem of masculinity has displaced a systemic, structural analysis of male power, and has displaced the problem of men possessing women. Our obsession with masculinity's supposedly never-ending crises merely bolsters the myth that if women and children are people, men cannot be. Confronted with violence and cruelty, we need to speak plainly. Family annihilators are not loving fathers. This is not love or despair, nor is it masculinity in crisis. It is masculinity at its most raw and extreme. An absolute statement of ownership over bodies and lives. If you can't have them, no one can. We cannot reduce the acts of men such as Sykes and Fuller to self-harm plus 2 or 3. She seems either unaware, or simply doesn't care, that twice as many mothers kill their children than do fathers. Is this an example of toxic femininity, I wonder? Or is it femininity in crisis? Of course not. Although I'm guessing it's the fault of masculinity somehow, right? Because it's always the fault of masculinity. This is all part of what I like to call the goddess in chains mentality. Males are seen as some type of demonic violent subspecies, which restricts and holds back the divine and perfect female. All the world's woes, men did them. Personal issues for women, men did them. Female insecurities, obviously men's fault somehow. Woman kills her husband, well, he must have deserved it. You see, if the feminine truly is divine, perfect and without fault, then how do you explain the fact that, just like men, women are human, imperfect, and faulty? Simple. You shift the blame. You see, it's not the fault of the goddess, because she's in chains. Her divinity is held down by the inferior males. Although not all feminists believe this, it is right at the heart of the modern-day feminist movement. It's the cornerstone of gender studies, and has spread throughout the internet, both in the media, and websites like RadFemHub and Tumblr. Of course we have seen this type of thing before. I mean, it wasn't the noble, pure, divine Aryans' fault that Germany was in financial crises. Oh no, it couldn't have anything to do with that from World War I. Nope, had to be those pesky Jews, right? My personal opinion is that both males and females are human, faulty, and imperfect. And that both males and females are capable of good and evil. And both males and females should be responsible for their actions. Mainstream modern-day feminism does not preach this, because it only sees the good in femininity, and only the bad in masculinity. Next.
In fact, feminism has helped men in a number of ways, and I'll explain that as this list goes on. But the MRM are about hate. They're about hating women predominantly, and some men. Terms like bitch, whore, slut, man-hater, feminazi, gynocracy, and men.
That's right, because feminists never use terms like misogynist, dickhead, neckbeard, virgin who can't get a girlfriend, woman-hater, and even the term rapist to describe MRAs, or men in general. And by the way, the rapist slur is something Kevin Logan uses later on in his video. Don't you just love hypocrites? Next.
And many others. Take it away, Davis.
Women in our culture have become the most decadent sluts since the fall of Rome.
Are all terms that can be thrown at women who disagree with you.
Oh no. His first example of an MRA is Davis O'Reilly, who isn't an MRA. I would think that if you are going to attack a group, and to justify that attack, you give examples of why that group is evil, that it would be logical to actually use examples from that group. For example, I hate Nazism, but it would be illogical for me to use Osama bin Laden as an example of a Nazi, because he wasn't a fucking Nazi. Now sure, Hitler and bin Laden have many things in common. They are both male, both lived in the 20th century, both had extremist ideologies, both had facial hair, both were human, all things that can be said about Mr. Logan here as well, by the way. But that doesn't mean all three of them were, or are, Nazis. Now it is true that Orini is an anti-feminist, and that most MRAs are anti-feminists as well, but being an MRA requires more than being an anti-feminist, and is not dependent on being an anti-feminist. In other words, although most MRAs are anti-feminist, not all anti-feminists are MRAs. Let me give you another analogy. It's a fact that all the presidents of the United States have been American, but that does not mean that all Americans have been the president of the United States. So why is it that individuals like Kevin Logan are incapable of understanding this? Well, they start with a bigoted stereotype of what an MRA is. They then use this bigoted stereotype to label people as MRAs, which then reinforces and justifies their original bigoted stereotype. In other words, it's circular reasoning. I mean, for fuck's sake, even feminists will label other feminists they don't like as MRAs, despite the fact that the feminist being labeled as an MRA is clearly an anti-MRA. In other words, it's fucked up crazy bullshit. And using Orini as an example of MRA is stupid at best, and downright dishonest at worst. Next.
Male feminists such as myself can expect to hear words like mangina, castrati, pussy chaser and white knight. Any and all of these phrases can be thrown by simple-minded idiots in the MRM to try and smear anyone who disagrees with them on any point whatsoever. Now, I freely admit there are a small number of feminists who want to impose a matriarchy and who probably do hate men, but they are a small and fringe element.
And by small and fringe element, he means the vast majority of academic feminists, feminist journalists, feminists in politics, feminist lobby groups, and many who infest the internet. Next.
Within the MRM, woman hatred is fucking rife.
An actual example of which he is yet to give.
They haven't done anything positive to try and help men in any way whatsoever, but they have called their ex-wife a bitch and a cunt and a slut on the internet. Bravo, gentlemen.
And here we see yet again the goddess in chains mentality, only this time applied to feminism and the MRM. Only the negatives of the MRM are presented, and in an exaggerated, distorted and fallacious way. While the negatives of feminism are dismissed as unimportant, minuscule, and a non-issue. This of course doesn't reflect reality. It's just an attempt to demonize one group, while simultaneously elevating the other. If you want to point out faults within the MRM, go ahead, but please make sure your examples are actually from the men's rights movement, and don't excuse and dismiss the same behavior in feminism. Mr. Logan will return later, but for now, next.
I'm not a victim crying for the rest of my life, crying for free money and free protection. Whereas the MRAs are precisely that. They're a bunch of pussies crying for attention.
Up next, we have a satirical video, titled, MRA Proof That the Patriarchy is a Myth. The description reads, mostly based on things the amazing atheist said in his Failure of Feminism video. The last joke though is just me making fun of the stupid, illogical standard of evidence he has for the patriarchy existing. And as we know, the amazing atheist is a famous MRA, right?
In Detroit with some extra security.
That's because the confab has received some threats from people who say it's a gathering of women haters. Now, Dean Esman says
women.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
Could this be any more stereotypical? Oh man, this looks exactly like you think it would.
See the neckbeard?
Yeah.
Neckbeard and the other whole suit.
Neckbeard
does not hit women.
Neckbeard level 5 million. Took off his one T-shirt, put on like the best possible outfit he had.
Cobble the suit together somehow. Like, just work with this tie.
No fedora though.
Yeah.
He's missing the fedora.
And then there's the uptight looking feminist beside him, like, eh.
Yeah, clearly the amazing atheist is an MRA, right? Clearly not. The funny thing is, I've always thought a lot of the false MRA stereotypes came from the false assumption that the amazing atheist is an MRA. Which kind of makes it ironic that he would then point out those same features in someone else. And for the record, I thought Dean Esme did a good job in that interview, even though it was clearly 3 against 1. Hello Dean, if you were watching. But back to the topic. If this guy's MRA satire is based on The Amazing Atheist, and The Amazing Atheist isn't an MRA, then we could probably just dismiss the whole thing now without even watching it. But where's the fun in that? Besides, maybe he does make fun of actual MRA talking points, and we won't find out unless we get stuck into it.
Hello. I would like to talk about the crazy feminist myth of the patriarchy. The idea that men run this society? Ridiculous.
Well, why don't we answer the question, do men run society?
We are now going through an amazing and unprecedented moment where the power dynamics between men and women are shifting very rapidly. And in many of the places where it counts the most, women are, in fact, taking control of everything. In my mother's day, she didn't go to college, not a lot of women did. And now, for every 2 men who get a college degree, 3 women will do the same. Women, for the first time this year, became the majority of the American workforce. And they're starting to dominate lots of professions: doctors, lawyers, bankers, accountants. Over 50% of managers are women these days. And in the 15 professions projected to grow the most in the next decade, all but 2 of them are dominated by women. So the global economy is becoming a place where women are more successful than men, believe it or not.
Patriarchy.
And this economic changes are starting to rapidly affect our culture, what our romantic comedies look like, what our marriages look like, what our dating lives look like, and our new set of superheroes. For a long time, this is the image of American manhood that dominated: tough, rugged, in control of his own environment. A few years ago, the Marlboro Man was retired and replaced by this much less impressive specimen, who is a parody of American manhood. And that's what we have in our commercials today. The phrase firstborn son is so deeply ingrained in our consciousness that this statistic alone shocked me. In American fertility clinics, 75% of couples are requesting girls and not boys. And in places where you wouldn't think, such as South Korea, India, and China, the very strict patriarchal societies are starting to break down a little, and families are no longer strongly preferring firstborn sons. If you think about this, if you just open your eyes to this possibility and start to connect the dots, you can see the evidence everywhere. You can see it in college graduation patterns, in job projections, in our marriage statistics. You can see it in the Icelandic elections, which you'll hear about later. And you can see it in South Korean surveys on son preference, that something amazing and unprecedented is happening with women. Certainly, this is not the first time that we've had great progress with women. The 20s and the 60s also come to mind.
Wow. That patriarchy sure sounds oppressive. Next.
I mean, I know we haven't had a woman president yet, but that is because women just suck, okay? It's not because there's some evil, supernatural, conspiratorial, spooky phantom patriarchy. Holding the women back. I mean, if the patriarchy is real, why don't men get women to fight in wars? It's always men, isn't it? I mean, I'm a reasonable guy. I admit that there was a patriarchy 200 years ago when we had an all-female army, obviously, but it's not the case anymore, so I have to ask, feminists, if the patriarchy is so real, why don't us men get you women to have all the fighting skills and all the dangerous weaponry? Why don't we give all that to the people we're oppressing?
Because apparently, women aren't allowed to own guns in America.
And gun selection really comes down to a matter of personal preference. What will work best for you and what you're looking for in a gun. So when somebody asks me what gun I would recommend, I first have to ask them back, what is the intended purpose for the gun?
Overthrowing the patriarchy, apparently.
Each one of my guns has an intended purpose, whether it be for target shooting and plinking, concealed carry, home defense, backwoods protection gun in the woods, zombies, SHTF scenario.
Hold on a second, did she just say zombies? Well, I guess zombies are as real as the modern-day patriarchy. Next.
I don't see any possible downside to that. And that's the thing about this feminist theory of the patriarchy. It does not account for all these situations where men don't exploit women.
Oh, okay. Because only women get exploited, and only men exploit. Right, got it. It's not something that some humans do to some other humans. Oh no, it's only those evil men doing it to those poor women, right?
If the patriarchy is real, why isn't, say, for example, the Statue of Liberty laying down, wearing a bikini, rubbing her ass, and suggestively licking her torch?
Okay, I admit, that is a good point.
That sounds more like a statue a man would have designed. Why instead is it a statue of some feminazi wearing a crown, triumphantly holding up some phallic-shaped item that was probably chopped off a 50-meter-high male statue as an obvious symbol of gynocratic power, huh? Yeah, you don't have a fucking answer for that, do ya? You evil, man-hating, misandrist cunts! Buy my book!
Of patriarchy!
Patriarchy!
Of patriarchy!
Patriarchy!
Of patriarchy!
Patriarchy!
I'm going to get some good edits out of that video. But back to the more serious stuff.
Feminists!
Number 2, yo. Courts are biased against men in custody cases. Now, this particular canard, which is still spread by the MRM, is based in the historical inadequacies of custodial courts on both sides of the Atlantic.
Okay, so he starts off by admitting an historical bias against men. Noted. Continue, Kevin.
It was the case at one point that men were discriminated against in these courts. But even this was due to the fact that women were the primary caretakers based on the patriarchal gender roles of the time.
Which, as I had pointed out numerous times before, has been supported by such feminist organizations as NOW. Wow, that patriarchy is sneaky, even feminists support it.
Yet this seems to be an all-pervasive thing among the MRM, that they still think that custodial cases are biased against them. But here are a few statistics that prove otherwise. It's worth pointing out that 91% of custody battles are resolved without ever seeing a court at all, and of the 9% that are, 5% are resolved after the custody evaluation hearing. So that means only 4% of custody battles actually go to court, and of that only 1.5% ever go fully through to the final conclusion of the court case.
Okay, so Kev has been kind enough to cite some sources in the description. So let's have a look at them. The first one is written by Kathy Meyer, who is the founding editor of Divorced Moms. Sounds unbiased. But let's not poison the well, as we should read the article and judge it on its own merits. The article in question appeared in Huffington Post. It's titled, Dispelling the Myth of Gender Bias in the Family Court System. The article starts with, We hear a lot about how the courts are biased in favor of mothers when deciding child custody. After a 10-year career as a divorce coach consultant and doing extensive research on the subject, I've come to the conclusion that the courts are not the reason mothers retain custody in the majority of divorces. And, not the reason many fathers aren't involved in their children's lives post-divorce. Below are a few stats from a Pew Research Center analysis of the National Survey of Family Growth, NSFG, released in June of 2011. Okay, let's look at these statistics. She starts with married fathers. According to the report, a married father spends on average 6.5 hours a week taking part in primary childcare activities with his children. The married mother spends on average 12.9 hours. Since two-income households are now the norm, not the exception, the above information indicates that not only are mothers working, but they are also doing twice as much childcare as fathers. It only makes sense that mothers who have a closer bond due to the time spent caring for a child be the one more likely to retain primary custody after a divorce. Of course, she doesn't mention that fathers, or should I say, males in general, on average work longer hours than their female counterparts. Mothers are more likely to work part-time, and fathers are more likely to work overtime to compensate. Which is one reason for the wage gap. Of course, she doesn't mention this as she is trying to create the stereotype of the overworked mother, and the uninterested father. I mean, those poor mothers, having to both work and do twice the child care, and those lazy deadbeat dads just have the one job, only one. How lazy. Clearly they don't care enough about their kids to take care of them, right? Bullshit. Proper context requires an examination of hours worked in paid employment. But do you know what's really funny about this?
But even this was due to the fact that women were the primary caretakers, based on the patriarchal gender roles of the time.
Yep, Kev's first link is using patriarchal gender roles as an excuse for mothers to gain custody. Shouldn't we be smashing the patriarchy by giving more custody to fathers, thus freeing up mothers to concentrate more on their career? Wow, this patriarchy stuff is confusing.
Patriarchy!
It's almost like feminists want their cake, and eat it too. But let's continue with the article. Divorced or unwed fathers. More startling are the stats on absent fathers, or the amount of time fathers spend with children once the divorce is final. According to the above study, when fathers and children live separately, 22% of fathers see their children more than once a week. 29% of fathers see their children 1 to 4 times a month. The most disturbing fact though is that 27% of fathers have no contact with their children at all. When you take into consideration that mothers spend more time taking care of children before divorce and only 22% of fathers take advantage of spending what I would consider quality time with their children after the divorce, the fact that more mothers retain custody seems reasonable, doesn't it? And of course, not once does she bother to ask, why aren't divorced fathers spending more time with their kids? She makes the assumption they simply don't want to, as opposed to being prevented from doing so. From the Daily Mail, by Penelope Leach. The vengeful mothers who tear fathers from their children's lives, Britain's top parenting guru on one of the unspoken scandals of our age. Children desperate not to hurt parents going through divorce. They may say they don't want contact with their father to please mother. Some bitter women are accusing their ex of not being fit to be father. This leads to child protection investigations. Penelope Leach suggests separating couples try mutual parenting. From the article. When a father, it's usually the father, leaves the family home, some mothers will lie to stop them from seeing the children or speaking to them. A father, hoping to talk to his son, will be told, he can't come to the phone, he's in the bath. To the child, no, it wasn't your father. Do you really think he's going to bother phoning? To the father on doorstep, they're not coming out with you. They've gone to their nans. To the children, you didn't want to go with him and leave me all by myself, did you? Perhaps cruelest of all, a parent may play on a child's sympathies, making him or her feel disloyal for loving the other parent. Don't you leave me, too. You're all I've got. Or, we're all right together, aren't we? We don't need him. Research shows that children are often so desperate not to hurt the parent they live with that they'll say whatever they know it's usually the mother, wants to hear. They may even say they no longer want any contact with daddy, when actually, they still love him. The parent who has left home, of course, is in a far weaker position than the furious mother. Indeed, a lot of fathers are sufficiently intimidated that contact with their children gradually shrivels and even stops. If a dad insists on seeing them, the mother may eventually realize that she can continue refusing access without a very good reason. At that point, she may set about producing one. Some women say there's been sexual abuse or domestic violence. They may suggest that the father's environment is unsafe, or that he's a bad influence. Alcoholism, drug addiction and mental illness may be mentioned, or that they suspect he'll take the child abroad. Whether such claims are accurate or not, they'll have to be investigated because they're to do with child protection, the family court's principal concern. And although parents no longer get legal aid for any other aspect of their breakup, mothers can get it for this because a child's safety is involved. A fact, I'm afraid, that's making this type of accusation more common. Understandably, the father is often outraged. If the mother's accusation has never previously been mentioned, it may seem difficult to understand why anyone takes any notice. However, if there's the least chance that a parent has been abusive, no contact can be allowed until the matter has been investigated. That means the father will have to apply to the court for a contact order. But the date for that hearing may well be months ahead, and until then, he won't be able to see his child. As a result, their relationship will be further damaged. At the moment, I have a close friend going through this exact same scenario, almost word for word. He loves his daughter dearly, and if he ever wants to see her again it's going to cost him an arm and a leg. A price he's willing to pay to get custody of his daughter. But I'm sure Kathy Meyer or Kevin Logan would somehow blame all this on toxic masculinity, or the patriarchy.
Patriarchy!
But back to the Huffington Post article by Kathy Meyer. She continues. Some fathers, those among the 27% who have no contact with their children post-divorce, may even argue that gender bias during divorce litigation is the reason they no longer engage in parenting or any form of relationship with their children. Which we just covered in the Daily Mail article. Next. But don't you need to take into consideration how child custody is decided in the majority of divorce cases before blaming gender bias on a father's post-divorce status? What do the statistics say about how custody is decided during divorce and whether or not there is a true gender bias? At this point, she quotes a long list of statistics, the same ones Kevin Logan already quoted, so I won't bother reading them again. But if you wish to read them, you might want to hit pause about now. Or as always, click on the link in the description. But let's have a look at the source of these stats. They come from a website called Divorce Peers. Now let's look at the stats on how is child custody decided. The stats presented on this page do in fact match those presented by Kevin and Kathy Meyer. But there are a couple of interesting things here. Firstly, these statistics are not based on recent studies. Secondly, if we look at the stats for child custody outcomes, mediation and trial, we see that when parents mediate, child custody goes to the mother, 63% of the time, to the father, 6% of the time, and joint custody, 25% of the time. So assuming these stats are still relevant today, mothers are over 10 times more likely to get sole custody through mediation than fathers. But let's look at the stats for when parents go to evaluation or trial. Sole custody goes to the mother, 44% of the time, to the father, 11% of the time, and shared custody, 40% of the time. So assuming these stats are still relevant today, mothers are 4 times more likely to get sole custody through an evaluation or trial. This would suggest a bias in the system. If custody has gone to either mediation, evaluation, or trial, I think it's safe to assume that both parents are interested in custody, either sole custody or shared. And if mothers are getting sole custody in vastly greater numbers than fathers, or even shared custody, then it would suggest a bias. Unless of course you make the bigoted and fallacious assumption that only bad fathers try to get custody. So, let's refresh our memories, and have another look at Kevin's claim before I explain why it's bullshit.
Yet this seems to be an all-pervasive thing among the MRM, that they still think that custodial cases are biased against them.
So what we have here by Kevin and Kathy Meyer is basically a canard, an obscurification of facts. Assuming all stats presented by Kevin and Kathy are legit and still relevant today, their argument should be presented as: although the majority of fathers do not go to mediation, evaluation, or trial in an attempt to gain custody, those who do are subjected to court bias based on gender. But instead their argument is, because the majority of fathers do not go to mediation, evaluation, or trial, there isn't a bias within the court system, based on gender. Now, I'm not sure if Kev is an idiot, or if he's too lazy to check his sources, or whether he's just being a dishonest arsehole, but either way, he's full of shit. Based on the evidence presented, when fathers go through the system to gain custody, they are far less likely to succeed. Now I guess it's only fair to ask, why do so few fathers go through the system to get custody? Well, I suspect there are many reasons. Obviously, if your ex is fair and reasonable, then there is no need for a court case, and obviously not all, or even most, females are hate-filled harpies intent on using their children to destroy their ex. And then there are those fathers who are deadbeat dads. I'm not going to deny their existence, I just don't like them being used to demonize good fathers, who are the majority. And then of course there is cost. Fighting for the custody of your children isn't free, and I'm guessing many struggling fathers are just unable to afford it, especially if they are already drowning in debt due to a messy divorce. And I'm guessing some fathers have given up, because their kids have been turned against them, and they know their chances of winning custody are slim at best. Now, Kevin does link to two more articles, one on something called Slog, the other from the Telegraph. Neither of which really adds anything new to what's already been discussed, so for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through them. As always, links below, feel free to read them yourself, and make up your own mind. Of course, if you think I've missed something, feel free to point it out in the comments section below, and if relevant, I'll cover it in a future episode. But for now, I'm going to talk about two types of equality, and the gender pay gap. No, this isn't Kevin's third point, we are still on his number 2, and although this may seem like a tangent, I will bring it back around to custody cases in a minute, and it will all make perfect sense. I hope. Equality is a word thrown around a lot when discussing gender politics. In fact, it's kind of hard to have a conversation on the topic without it coming up in one form or another. But what does it mean? Well, for the sake of this discussion, there are two types. When I use the term equality in relation to work and pay, I'm talking about equal opportunity. For example, when someone applies for a job, their gender should be irrelevant, and what should matter is their experience, their qualifications, their enthusiasm, intelligence, personality, things like that. And if they get that job, then they should receive equal pay, for equal work, regardless of their gender. In other words, the starting point should be equal. Equal opportunity, and equal compensation for equal work. But what happens after that, is based on their effort and ability. In other words, a meritocracy. If someone puts in more effort, works longer hours, and has greater ability, they should be rewarded for that. Think of it like the Olympics. Every sprinter has the equal distance to run, and they start the race at an equal point in time. But who finishes first is based on ability and effort. In other words, merit. And this is why the pay gap myth is bullshit, because if males on average work longer hours than females on average, then they earn more on average. As long as males and females are paid equally per hour, for the exact same work, then there is no discrimination involved. This is what I mean by the word equality. Equality of opportunity. But most feminists mean something different. They mean equality of outcome. Using their own logic, they aren't interested in the sprinters at the Olympics having equal opportunity, starting at an equal point in time, and running an equal distance. No, their idea of equality would be for everyone to finish at the same time, even though it would require some sprinters running a shorter distance, and starting before everyone else. And we see this with the wage gap myth, where they expect females, who on average work less hours, to earn the same as males, who on average work longer. Which is an impossibility without paying females more, for less work. So why have I gone off on this tangent? Simple really. If feminists value equal outcomes so much, like in the wage gap, or number of female CEOs etc., regardless of mitigating factors, then why don't they argue for equal outcome of custody hearings? Wouldn't this free up mothers to spend more time pursuing their careers, thus narrowing the wage gap, and enabling females to climb the corporate ladder to success more quickly? Wouldn't equal outcome in child custody solve many of the feminist issues, or at least help? Wouldn't it help to break down the patriarchal gender roles, where women are expected to be the primary carers of children? Why isn't this a feminist cause like the wage gap myth? Why aren't they fighting for it? To be honest with you though, I'm kind of glad they're not, because if you remember, I said I'm an equal opportunity guy, not an equal outcome guy. And I think equal opportunity is the solution for the mess that is the custody system. In my opinion, the system should start with a set standard 50-50 custody. This is the equal starting point. Now if for some reason 50-50 doesn't suit a particular situation, for example, one parent may not want custody, or may have limited time due to career, or whatever, under those circumstances time can be negotiated up or down, with the possibility of renegotiation if circumstances change, or possibly every couple of years. Now I don't expect this would be a perfect system, there will always be arseholes out there, who use their kids to get back at their ex, and both males and females are capable of this, for the record. But I do think this would be a fairer system, a more equal system. A system with less bias against fathers. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments section. In the meantime, let's get back to Kev.
It's also worth pointing out that as the majority of judges are male, it can hardly be held against women that there might be some perceived bias in the situation.
Oh geez. Not this bullshit argument again. Just because a judge has a penis, doesn't mean he gives out special penis passes to all males. This is just another example of how bullshit patriarchy theory is.
Patriarchy!
And ignores the systemic bias in the entire justice system towards males, you know, a little thing called the sentencing gap. Ever hear of that, Kevin? No, of course not. Next.
Even though there actually isn't any fucking bias whatsoever, because as the study linked below suggests, fathers are less involved with their children during a marriage, they're even less involved after a divorce. Most of the instances of women getting sole custody are because the father agreed to it, and that there is actually no bias in the system at all.
I'm just going to leave this here. Remember, these come from the same stats Kevin is referring to. Next.
So in other words, the problem with fatherlessness is down to deadbeat fathers. Which brings me on to the points in which I'm going to try and help the MRA to become a decent campaigning organisation.
This will be interesting.
Firstly, it would be stop aligning yourselves with the pickup artists, who basically are absolute fucking advocates for deadbeat fathers. The worst kind of fucking losers.
This is hilarious, as it's feminists who constantly align us with the pickup artists. In fact, a good number of Kev's examples of men's rights activists, which he shows later on, are in reality pickup artists. Seriously, what a fuckwit. Next.
It doesn't make you look good. It doesn't make you look like you're for positive fatherhood at all, okay?
Which is exactly why dishonest feminist arseholes like Kevin constantly falsely align us with the pickup artists. Something Kev does repeatedly later on in his video. Next.
Stop doing it. Secondly would be to come up with positive parenting action plans. Basically come up with a template, a list of things that men can do to try and make their lives and their homes more conducive to child rearing. Therefore, they can go to a custody court and demonstrate to the judge that they have made very positive steps and strides towards trying to be a better father and to make their home environment more conducive to raising children.
But of course this is a requirement that Kev only puts on males. Meanwhile in the real world, The sane and logical individuals know that not all fathers are bad, nor all mothers are automatically good. Next.
But have the MRM done any of these positive things? No.
You mean like this, Kevin? Can you guess which group of people had a problem with it? Go on, I'll give you 3 guesses. From Huffington Post. Men's Centre opens in Toronto amid controversy. YWCA Canada CEO, Paulette Senior voiced concerns about those involved behind the scenes at the new centre, adding that there are other organizations that already are supporting the conversation about what being a man is. As an example, she pointed to the White Ribbon Campaign, which is organized by men working to end men's violence towards women. There are other men who are responsible and accountable men who are raising this conversation in their own circles, whether it be violence or equality or just common, everyday conversation where there are things that are happening that are denigrating women, Senior said. That is the type of society that we need to be thinking about, is how can we put an end to these things? Not how can we support men so they can quote-unquote be men as they have always been in terms of denigrating women. But to build a society where everyone can feel as if they can operate and be themselves in a fair way to others and how they can respect each other. You just got to love the feminist mindset, don't you? I mean, they criticize the men's rights movement for doing nothing, but of course when we do something, we are told that we shouldn't be doing it, because feminism has it taken care of. By the way, I love how she suggests that the Center for Men isn't needed as there are already organizations like White Ribbon, which is about ending male violence towards women. Wow, so in other words, the only organizations men are allowed to have, are ones focused on the needs of women. Wow. No need to talk about male suicide, or male victims of domestic or sexual abuse, or male homelessness, or fathers being alienated from their children. Nope, can't talk about any of that, because only women's issues matter. And this, folks, is why we need the men's rights movement. By the way, fuck you feminism. Next.
They have bitched about stuff on the internet, and you'll notice this, it's a recurring pattern. They've whined about stuff, but they've done fuck all to actually try and improve the situation.
Well, Kev, I believe I just disproved that. I think we have just enough time left to quickly squeeze one more point in from Mr. Kevin Logan. Take it away, Kev.
3. Being able to avoid the draft is a female privilege. Now this particular one will be brought out by any MRA when they're involved in a discussion or a debate where they're in a tight spot. Someone will have gotten them into a position where they have no way out and so they start flinging shit. This particular shit will go something along the lines of, only men are eligible for the draft, women are eligible for the draft, meh. In order to argue this point seriously, you have to ignore an absolute mountain of evidence against you, such as the fact that in virtually every incidence of any all-male draft in the history of the world has been voted on or imposed by a virtually or entirely male legislature/monarchy/dictatorship. It has been enforced by a mainly or entirely male police force, and it has been conducted by a mainly or entirely male military hierarchy. Yeah, but somehow apparently it's feminism's fault, is it?
Well, that's strange. Just a second ago he said,
being able to avoid the draft is a female privilege.
Which is true, because it's a responsibility, and an obligation placed on males, but not on females. But then Kevin says,
yeah, but somehow apparently it's feminism's fault, is it?
Kevin doesn't seem to understand that there is a difference between acknowledging that an issue exists, and placing blame on a group for that issue. This is something I've seen many times before with feminists. They'll state that males don't have issues, or that males have more rights than females. And when you demonstrate that this is wrong, by pointing out the draft, or the right to bodily integrity, they will scream something like, but that's not the fault of feminists, or, that's not the fault of women. When you hadn't even mentioned feminists, or women, or whoever they bring up. I'm tempted to call this a derailing tactic, but I suspect it goes a bit deeper than that. I suspect that they're incapable of seeing another viewpoint, without looking through the lens of their ideology. So Kevin, for the record, the draft is female privilege, there is no doubt about that. But it's not the fault of feminism. Believe it or not, Kev, MRAs don't blame everything on feminism.
Also, you have to ignore the fact that it was feminists that argued against the draft on both sides of the Atlantic. You also have to ignore the fact that feminists have argued against the barring of homosexuals, or at least openly homosexuals, in the military in both America and Britain.
I have no problem acknowledging any of that. But it has nothing to do with your original point, which was
being able to avoid the draft is a female privilege.
And the fact that the draft is exclusively a male obligation means that it is indeed female privilege. Next.
Also, are you suggesting the fact that only men die in wars because of this? No, lots of women died, especially when the reversal of the 90 to 10 ratio of military to civilian deaths has flipped after the Industrial Revolution. You also have to ignore the fact that rape has been used as a weapon of war, largely by men against women. But yeah, you crazy brave keyboard warriors keep tapping away.
You know, there is a very simple way to make MRAs shut up about the draft. It really is extremely simple. You either make it for everyone, or you do away with it completely and make it for no one. Therefore all citizens have equal obligation. Remember that word from before, equal? It really isn't that hard. And although feminism isn't responsible for it, they don't seem to be doing much to stop it either. But then again, I guess manspreading, or a shirt worn by a scientist are far more pressing issues. So let me make this simple for Kevin and his feminist friends, let me make it really simple so even their logic-starved brains can grasp it. Either do the right thing and help us, by opposing the draft, or get the fuck out of our way. It's that simple. Well, that's it for this episode, folks, so until next time, don't drink the poison Kool-Aid.
Hello there. Events surrounding the University of Virginia annoyed the fuck out of me twice last week. Firstly, when the UVA men's basketball team were knocked out in the third round of the NCAA March Madness basketball tournament, which totally fucked up the eastern quarter of my bracket. Thank you, Cavaliers. But more importantly were the revelations and the subsequent reactions from the MRA regarding the rape allegations made in a story revealed in the Rolling Stone magazine surrounding the Phi Kappa Psi fraternity of the University of Virginia, which have now subsequently turned out to be false. Now obviously the MRAs had jumped on this as aggressively as a frat boy would onto a drunken girl. And their reaction can basically be summed up like this. So the inevitable has happened. The great hoax, the great false rape hoax has been exposed. Our brothers in the Phi Kappa Psi fraternity have been cleared of all allegations against them. Now I have something to explain to you stupid fucking whores. Now obviously the fact that the UVA rape allegations have been proven totally 100% incorrect, it means that there is absolutely no rape culture whatsoever. That's conclusive proof, obviously. Now we in the MRA obviously already knew this because our Lord and Saviour, His Royal Alphaness himself, Roosh V, praise be upon him.
Roosh V? You mean Roosh V who is a pickup artist, and isn't a men's rights activist? That Roosh V? So what was it you said just before, Kevin?
Firstly, would be stop aligning yourselves with the pickup artists, who basically are absolute fucking advocates for deadbeat fathers.
Yeah, that's right, Kev, because it's the MRM aligning ourselves with the pickup artists, and not lying, hypocritical, scumbag feminists like yourself falsely doing so. Nope, must be totally us. What a lying fuckwit. Next.
Had already told us that any allegations made publicly by women about rapes were false and that they were fucking liars. But obviously the feminazis,
feminists,
the fucking mangina fucking bitches, obviously never got the fucking message. The stupid fucking cunts. Now listen, women, ladies, bitches, cunts, sluts, cum dumpsters. Try and get this into your stupid fucking tiny heads, because I know you're probably thinking about shoes or babies or something. I mean, I don't know, I don't fucking care, obviously. Try and get this one idea into your fucking heads. You know, you think that your body is yours. It isn't, it's ours, obviously it's ours. Below, I've linked an article by Paulie Lamb, the respected journalist from A Voice for Men, which is obviously an incredibly reliable news source. And that proves 100% conclusively that all men who have been convicted of rape should be released. Now this, again, 100% conclusively proves that basically you aren't really human beings. You're just basically places for us to temporarily store our cocks as and when we see fit. If you do get pregnant at any point, we may allow you to have an abortion, but you will have to ask for our permission first. Now, it doesn't matter that rape may or may not be happening on some of the campuses. I mean, who really gives a fuck about that? We certainly fucking don't. Why should there be any rules placed upon anybody so that we may actually try and protect women and their fucking bodily autonomy from being fucking raped?
So the best way to stop women being raped on campus is to create and promote false stories of rape? And then to publicly vilify those falsely accused of the fictitious rapes? And anyone pointing out how illogical and dishonest this is actually pro-rape? So basically to be a feminist you just need to be a lying cunt? Okay, got it.
Now all this logic and reason and scepticism has made me a bit peckish, so why the fuck don't you get back into the kitchen where you belong, you lazy stupid fucking whore, and make me a sandwich?
And go make me a ham sandwich.
And you should definitely go and buy some of my atheist t-shirts, because it's really important to the cause, because, you know, logic and scepticism and all those other words that I claim to give a fuck about. Because nothing's going to defeat the Westboro Baptist Church and militant Islam more than a t-shirt that says logic on it. And P.S. I have absolutely no respect for women as human beings whatsoever.
Maybe we should hear from an actual MRA about the UVA rape case, for fair comparison.
Fiction has to be believable, it has to be consistent, it has to make sense, it has to obey the rules of its own universe.
Its own world, correct.
Right? And nonfiction doesn't have to do any of that. Nonfiction doesn't have to be believable. It doesn't, you know, like, people get fed something and they're told it's a true story, and they there's something about the sort of the assumption that this is a true story that allows them to completely suspend their credulity, suspend their disbelief. I mean, take the Jackie UVA rape hoax, for instance. I mean, there were so many things in that story that was told in Rolling Stone that would have made what happened physically impossible, right? If you crash through a glass coffee table, if that glass is regular glass, you may actually end up bleeding out within half an hour, right? Because they're going to be large shards of glass, some of them inside you, right? If it's tempered glass, it's going to take so much force to break that coffee table, to shatter it. You're probably going to have some broken bones, right? And then you're going to be raped for 3 hours on top of a pile of broken glass, right? And not bleed to death at some point. You're going to be able to walk away. I don't think anybody would even be able to crawl away from that, but walk away, right? And on top of that, there are 9 guys in the room, and they all choose to bounce their fucking bare nutsacks off of a pile of broken glass rather than the 9 of them. She could be a 400-pound woman, and the 9 of them could have moved her to some place where these guys could preserve their fucking nutsacks if they were actually going to rape her, right? If this rape actually occurred. There's no way men would kneel in broken glass, put their hands in broken glass, and bounce their nutsacks off of broken glass, right, when they could easily move her to somewhere else, right? Like, I'm sorry, but it's completely unbelievable that this would happen. Even if there was a gang rape and there was a pile of broken glass, it's completely unbelievable that these rapists would choose to do that. It makes no sense whatsoever, and so many people bought it simply because it was presented to them as a true story, and they were convinced by that they didn't need to be aware or be hyper alert for inconsistencies and things that weren't believable and things that didn't make logical sense, right? So it really is that fiction has to abide by much stricter rules than journalism when it comes to being convincing.
Feminists like Kevin Logan may not care about what they read or believe, being truthful or accurate, but I fucking do. The UVA case is the perfect example of someone putting their ideology before the facts, as is Kevin's piss-poor characterization of MRAs.
Patriarchy